Welcome to Making Peace with Your Past, the StoryShift Masterclass. How to shift our internalized stories and feel at home in ourselves. I'm Ann Wade, and I'm so glad you're here. We all have stories about ourselves and our lives. Some are our memories, cherished or otherwise. Others are internalized, they're subconscious and invisible, and yet it seems like those are the ones that are running the show. Well, what are these internalized stories? Where do they come from? And what do they have to do with feeling at home within ourselves? And what does that even mean? Well, to begin answering that, we'll start with where our internalized stories come from, how they're created, and why they mattered. That will help us understand the role they play in dictating how we live our lives and how we experience the life we're living. I'll introduce you to a self-healing tool, my personal favorite, that you can begin using right away. And then at the end of today's masterclass, I have a gift and an invitation for you. So come on and hang out with me for a little while. But first, come imagine with me for just a moment. Imagine making peace with your past. Imagine feeling free from other people's expectations. Imagine feeling free from having to, contort yourself and who you are in order to feel accepted, to feel like you belong. Imagine feeling like you belong, no matter where you are or who you're with. Imagine no longer feeling trapped in the same old patterns, same old circumstances, same old relationships. Imagine no longer feeling confined by self-doubt. Imagine reconnecting with your own true voice instead of feeling like parts of you have been silenced by you or anyone else. Imagine feeling completely at home in your own life, comfortable, safe, real. Let me tell you a little story. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who didn't feel at home in her own life. She didn't feel like she belonged, even though she had two parents, a nice house to live in, plenty to eat. But this little girl had so many burning questions about so many things. The grown-ups in her world, though, they told her the story that they told her they were not appropriate questions for a little girl to ask. She felt like a misfit before she even knew what it felt like to fit. Now, some days she tried to squish herself into their mold. Other days she tried to hide behind her good and proper little girl mask. But on the very best days, she imagined herself to be a wise woman, a scientist perhaps, or a great teacher, maybe a princess in a fairy tale. A witch might be nice. By the time she was 8, she felt adrift in her own world. But the children around her seemed to easily accept the rules of their parents, their town, their schools and churches. They seemed happy, and she wanted to be happy. So she tried harder to follow the rules, to silence that little girl, but always seemed to fall short. And worse, no one noticed her trying. They only saw her failing, asking the wrong questions, causing trouble, embarrassing her family. She couldn't bear to feel like an outcast. So finally, she did the only thing left. She tried to forget the little girl who asked the questions. She played by the rules. She attended church, went to college, got a degree and a good job. She married her college boyfriend and had 2 beautiful daughters. They built a house. They drove nice cars. They bought a boat. They did all the things the world had told her to do. And she told herself that she had finally found her home. Well, it was a nice story until it wasn't. Life fell apart, and she realized that deep down, she'd always known that it would, because despite assembling all the approved building blocks, the home she had built was fragile at its core. The foundation for this home had been their rules, their narratives about who she was and who she should be. And once again, she felt homeless in her own life. Well, that little girl was me. Maybe she's you too. For me, when my outwardly cozy yet inwardly painful world collapsed, it hit really hard that I had spent my whole life simultaneously trying to be myself and abandon myself. I had wanted to find my home and run away from home. I had wanted to be seen and also be invisible. I had wanted to do my own thing and also fit in. I'd wanted to be recognized, but also anonymous. But mostly I had longed for someone, anyone, to see behind the facade, even while I was strengthening the facade. Well, I was already 40, but I still felt 14 or 4. The habit of trying to be two people at the same time, me and not me, was deeply ingrained. Only now there were 3 versions of me and not me occupying this body, and each of them had big needs. My 40-something self was just eager to forge a new and true life. My 14-year-old self, she was not done rebelling. And my 4-year-old self, she just wanted to curl up in someone's lap, be loved. There were a lot of other voices in there too. The voices of those with their own agendas. The voices of those spreading false narratives about me. And the voices of my children who counted on me to be a good grown-up in their world. It was noisy in there. Each of those voices had its own story about who I was or should be, but the voice of my own inner critic was becoming the loudest of all. What was wrong with me? Why did people only want me if I conformed to who they wanted me to be and what they wanted me to do? How did I keep ending up in the same old relationships and situations where the only way to be accepted, to belong, was to pretend I was someone I wasn't? Why wasn't it enough to just be me? Well, that's what it means to feel homeless in your own life, defined by other people's stories, stories they've imposed on you for their own purposes, or maybe because they felt homeless in their own lives, they want you to fix that for them. Home is not a house. It is not just 4 walls and a roof. You can live in a beautiful house and still feel homeless. This feeling of homelessness comes from the inside out. It comes from longing for acceptance, forgiveness, the space and grace to grow, to evolve, to ask questions, and for it to be okay to simply be yourself. So come imagine with me again. What if you could stop feeling homeless in your own life? What if you could silence their story of who you should be and how you should act and what you should do? What if in your story of yourself, it was okay to just be you? What if you could do that without having to pretend some things never happened or didn't hurt when they did? Because they did happen, and some of them did hurt. But that doesn't have to become a life sentence. But what if, this is a biggie, what if your own stories of something that hurt you could be addressed and dissolved so that, yes, it happened, but it doesn't have to keep hurting you? StoryShift is the self-healing practice that finally helped me make peace with my own past. It began quieting those old stories that had been running like some awful computer programming in the background, And most importantly, it helped me stop feeling homeless, like I didn't belong in my own life. What ultimately became StoryShift? Well, it came to me in bits and pieces, and I'd actually been doing those bits and pieces for years, but not consistently and not put together as a practice or, really more accurately as a lifestyle. I'm a work in progress, and that's just fine. Yeah, I had read so many books, and I had devoured every personal development and energy healing program and practice I could get my hands on. I had worked really, really hard on managing my thoughts, but some of them just would not quit. Why? What was I doing wrong? Well, nothing. The problem wasn't me, or that I hadn't yet read the right book, or that I sucked at managing my thoughts. The problem was and is that the problem does not start with our thoughts. Our thoughts happen in the middle of the process. They aren't the beginning at all, and that is a very important clue. Once we understand where our thoughts come from and how our internalized stories get created and why some thoughts and stories keep running on repeat, no matter how hard we work on managing them, then we can begin rebuilding our sense of self from the inside out. Then we can come out of hiding and remember our way home to our true self, our whole self. And then we can regenerate our stories based on the truth of who we really are without changing the facts of what happened. And then all those desires we imagined at the beginning of this class, they can start becoming our everyday reality. But first, in case we haven't met before, let me introduce myself. I'm Ann Wade, teacher, writer, and story shifter. My master's degree in education focused on the psychology and physiology of how we learn. So it was whole brain, whole body, whole emotional, intuitive, energetic, and spiritual self, all of our parts working together as they're designed to. After my first marriage ended, I actually started my own training and organizational development company. We worked mostly with major industry, and we worked with some of the biggest companies in the country. Gradually, we also began working with nonprofits and then with women-owned businesses. Well, that may seem like an odd mix, but the thread running through all of it was the growth, development, and healing of the individual, and how important our personal work is, not only to each of us, but how it fits into the big picture of our careers, our circumstances, our relationships, and then out into the world. I once told an executive of a company that's a household name, you would know it, that his company could only grow to the degree that he was willing to grow, develop, and heal himself. See, I truly believe that the healing of our world begins with each of us doing our own personal healing. And you know what? That CEO agreed. I love learning, and I have lots of certifications. There are 3 that matter to the work that we'll be doing here. One is EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, which is probably the best known style of tapping. If you're not familiar with tapping, don't worry. You'll get an introduction today. I personally learned tapping about 20 years ago from Gary Craig, who developed it. He developed tapping by modifying and simplifying an older version of tapping, and then I modified and simplified a little more to create StoryShift tapping. And I've been practicing that way ever since. That's what I'll show you today. Another is grief recovery. We grieve every time we experience a loss, no matter how inconsequential we might think it is. You might lose your glasses. But grieving is not just for major losses. And once we understand that, we have got a robust tool that we can use and rely on. I'm also certified in NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Neuro refers to the nervous system. Linguistic refers to language. NLP is the study of how individuals, each of us, organize and integrate our thinking, feeling, and language. And right there, we just introduced the missing link: feelings, emotions, and their very, very vital role. The catalyst for me finally putting all these pieces together into StoryShift happened in 2011 when I met my current husband. On our second or third date, a woman neither of us knew came running up to us, and she's like waving and wagging her finger, and she says, this, what is this? You two seem connected even when you're not touching. What are you doing? Well, we didn't really know. We didn't really know her. We didn't know her at all. But as I pondered the inner work that had led to our meeting each other, all those little bits and pieces started coming together, and StoryShift, the process, the practice, was born. Oh, wonderful, amazing. Now, StoryShift is actually not about finding romantic love, but you can certainly use it that way. What it is about finding love from the inside out, returning to the wholeness and love that are our birthright. That's the key. The first step is healing and clearing your old internalized stories so that you can once again begin feeling at home within yourself, even if you don't ever remember feeling at home in yourself. Our minds are story-making machines. Even as our hearts pump blood and our lungs pump air, our minds pump ideas, and they spin feelings into stories all day, every day. Some remain conscious, some become unconscious, but they all play a role in creating our lives and how we experience the life we're living. We love our stories, even the ones we don't like very much. We believe them, we identify with them, and we are very attached to them. And we claim them all as truth, no matter how much suffering some of them cause. We crave the sense of identity they give, even if we know the identity they're creating is false. It's not this true self. But we'll wear that identity like an invisibility cloak as long as it gets us into places and circumstances and relationships we think we want. We become addicted to our stories, and we're afraid we'll no longer know who we are without them. And we wouldn't. No matter how uncomfortable they're making us, they're familiar. And that makes them part of our comfort zone. Without the invisibility cloak of our old stories, we'd feel naked. Our real self would feel exposed. We've been hiding her for so long, we're almost afraid to see what she looks like now. And yet we're eager to bust out of our old uncomfortable zone. We build ourselves out of stories, our stories, and other people's stories sometimes. Some aren't true or helpful or kind, but we let them become our building blocks anyway. I mean, think about this. Maybe this one came from a happy moment and that one came from deep sorrow. This one came from a childhood hurt, but that one came from a role model. This one came from heartache, that one came from confidence. This one came from acceptance, and that one came from rejection. This one came from false accusations, and that one came from well-earned accolades. And all of them helpful business blocks for our inner sanctuary? Are we willing to give them all a permanent role in determining our lives? What would it feel like? What would it feel like to start creating a new story that honors our uniqueness, our beauty, our magnificence, our wholeness, and guides us back to our true inner home? Oh, but that's when our old nemesis, that old voice in our head, It seductively reminds us that our track record hasn't been so great all the time. I mean, look at this story. Look at this life we're currently living. And then fear and worry come crowding in. What if reframing our story is more like a game of cosmic Jenga? One false move and the whole thing comes crashing down. We're not sure whether that's exhilarating or terrifying or both, but we do know something has to change. In her book, Untamed, Glennon Doyle writes, "You're here to decide if your life, relationships, and world are true and beautiful enough for you. And if they're not, and you dare to admit they're not, you must decide if you have the guts, the right, perhaps even the duty to burn to the ground that which is not true and beautiful enough and get started building what is." So let me share another story with you. 2 winters ago, a very attractive house I passed nearly every day burned. Now, all people and pets got out safely. From the street, there seemed to be very little damage. You had to look really closely and deliberately to see just a slight smokiness around the front door. Now, for the next 2 years, she presented this face to the world. And yet, if you knew where you look, you could see that she'd been wounded. So I made a point of noticing her. No one wants to be ignored, and she didn't deserve to be invisible just because she had been wounded. 2 springs later, repair work began. First, the furniture was carted out. Most of it was badly burned. Next, the sheetrock was removed, or what was left of it. Clearly, the damage had been far worse than her public face had let on. A few weeks later, trees and shrubbery were removed so the workers could get to the back of the house. And that's when the real damage became apparent. Nearly the whole back was burnt off. On one side, the bricks from the outer wall had tumbled. She had been concealing the extent of her woundedness behind a brave facade. Soon, all the damaged parts seemed to be removed, and the rebuilding began. New framing went up. There were new foundations poured. She was changing herself, keeping herself and changing herself. But a week or so later, one whole end collapsed. Part of the roof fell in. It was the most heavily damaged side, but the workers had been shoring it up. Despite moving forward with her new self, she still had more damage to deal with if her rebuild was to be strong and true. And her story has me pondering on all of us. When we feel damaged, our instinct is to present a brave face, put on a mask, to prop ourselves up somehow. And we often put off healing, doing our deep work. We put it off as long as possible, especially if we think the healing itself might be painful. Or we tell ourselves, oh, we've taken care of all the damage, enough of it. We're eager to move on. And yet, if we don't give ourselves the space and grace to heal, we will remain frozen, trapped in our damage, paralyzed, stuck in a place and state we don't want. A brave face to the world, but dead inside. Wishing and hoping that someone will look beyond the mask, that someone will see the real us still inside. Coming out from behind that brave mask is really scary at first, but then you realize you can breathe so much better when you aren't pretending everything is okay. Consider the difference between being brave, strength, personal power, grace, and looking brave, masquerading, surrounded by a force field, prickly. I have a feeling this house had been doing a bit of both, and maybe we all do. A week or so later, I passed the house and, of course, noticed her as always. The rest of her roof had been removed, and I caught myself wondering if she would survive the healing, or they were going to take her all the way down. And again, that's much like most of us. We put on that brave face, and we kind of hide behind it. Maybe we get trapped behind it. And then at some point, we make the courageous decision to heal. And at first, it's exciting. Everything seems to go well. We're clearing out the damage. And then, without warning, we get thrust into the stage of, well, it gets better before it gets worse. I mean, oh, that was backwards. It gets worse before it gets better. And we wonder if we can go on. We wonder if it's worth it. We wonder if we can survive the healing and become whole again. And at that point, we have two choices. Persevere, knowing that the outcome might not be what we had hoped, or stop and accept where we are. There's not a right answer, or a wrong one either for that matter. There's only awareness and acceptance of what feels right for us in this moment. And it doesn't matter if anyone else understands or agrees. What we're doing is remembering our way home to our own wholeness, to our true self. Well, I'm happy to report that the house lives. Now, only about a third of her original structure was salvaged, but to her it was worth saving. And once she had dealt with the damage, the rebuild has been swift and sure. Now, she's changed herself in some ways, and yet she is clearly, wholly, and truly herself. We know we can't go back and change anything that's already happened. And that's okay, because maybe we're finally realizing we can change the stories we tell ourselves about what it all means and what it says about us. And yes, we can do that without needing to pretend that some things never happened or didn't hurt when they did. That fire happened and it hurt her. There's a much better way for us to deal with that part of our history, to make it of use. The purpose of StoryShift is to help us remember our way home, not to a physical house, although we all like living in a nice one, whatever that means to each of us. It's not even to the home we wished for in childhood, although many of us still wish it had felt safer and more supportive. Home is not a physical place. It's the place where the essence of you feels like it belongs. We don't have to work at being loved and accepted. We don't have to pretzel ourselves to please other people, to meet their expectations, or to earn their love. Home is where it's simply okay to be you, and that's more than enough. The home we're really seeking is within ourselves. It's our original innate wholeness. It's the place where we can always be real, vulnerable, connected, safe, and accepted, no matter what is going on in our lives or in the world around us. It's the place where we always belong, warts and all, and we're beginning to realize that warts are just pieces of ourselves that someone else didn't like or we didn't accept. They're just like unloved little pieces, bits and pieces of ourselves. And once we begin remembering that we were born whole and wholly in love with ourselves, even if we've forgotten and that idea feels strange, our whole perspective begins changing. And once we begin coming home with ourselves, no person and no circumstance can ever make us feel homeless again. So to begin shifting our story and remembering our way home, let's begin at the beginning. The psychology and physiology of how our stories are created. As humans, we experience everything through our senses. The 5 physical senses we learned in elementary school, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The number of senses humans may have, that's a hotly debated subject. Is it 5? Is it 55? Does it matter? Because there's solid arguments for almost any number you pick, because we humans are sensory machines. What does matter is that all senses have a common denominator, and that common denominator is emotion. Emotion is a physiological experience or state of awareness that gives us information about the world around us, both in our immediate vicinity and out there in the greater world. And although these two words are often used interchangeably, feeling is actually different. It's the meaning our brain attaches to experiencing an emotion. That's the psychology piece. That's the story we begin telling ourselves about what that emotion means and what it says about us. Now, we humans are designed to feel, to experience the entire spectrum of emotions, not just the approved positive few. And that's because all emotions are messengers and they take their jobs very seriously. Emotions are neither good nor bad. They're actually part of our inner guidance system. They're full of wisdom and good counsel. They're meant to deliver whatever their message is in the moment and then move on through. They're not meant to take up residence in our bodies, but that is exactly what happens if we label, avoid, suppress, or stuff any of them, as we've been conditioned and culturalized to do. Emotions can show us where we're hurting and where to direct our healing. They can show us where to take action or to refrain from taking action. They can lead us through deeper issues. They can show us where to lighten up. Labeling, avoiding, suppressing, and stuffing, they have the adverse effect of making that emotion try harder to deliver its message. That emotion is compelled by its own design to complete its delivery mission. If we interfere with that completion, knowingly or unknowingly, we will experience the result as being stuck in or consumed by the feeling story we've attached. So, what are your emotions trying to tell you? Well, here are a few possibilities. Anger may be telling you that your boundaries have been crossed and reminding you that boundaries are really codes for your own conduct. Guilt may be telling you that you're the one who has crossed a boundary and your integrity is suffering. Maybe an apology is in order. False guilt could be telling you that someone is trying to blame you for something and you have a decision to make. Take a stand or succumb to their blame. Fear is asking you to look around. Fear. Do you need protection? Or does someone or something that matters to you need protection? Or is it an old fear tricking you into thinking there's present danger? Hatred. Hatred may be showing you where your own awareness needs strengthening. How'd you get to a place where hate is front and center? What feels threatened? Jealousy and envy are speaking to feelings of betrayal. Did we let ourselves down? Is it coming from our own greed? Is it a misunderstanding? Stress. Ooh, big one. Stress is warning of your resistance. Funny thing about resistance, it's often spoken of as if it's all bad. But what if it's sometimes wisdom in disguise? What if our intuition is calling our attention to something we need to do or not do, but we're resisting because we fear it'll make someone angry or there might be other repercussions? And remember, fear is also begging us to pay attention. Sadness, grief, despair, they're all coming from a reluctance to release something or maybe someone that is gone. I mean, we think of it with the biggies, death, for example. Instead of fighting it, allow yourself plenty of space and grace to mourn. Allow yourself to feel the sadness all the way through to the joy. Back to joy. It may be in a completely different way, that joy, but through. Feel it, the grief and sadness all the way through. Oh, let's flip that a minute. Happiness. Happiness is signaling anticipation, possibility, hope, delight. It's meant to create delight, rejoicing, euphoria in a moment, and then move on. Despite what the positivity movement wants us to believe, a constant state of happiness is not desirable. Chasing constant happiness can have an adverse effect of causing suffering, a sense of failure, and leading to a joyous life. Joy shows connection and expansion at the very same time. It radiates out as we feel it and then propels itself from heart to heart. Contentment. Contentment speaks of fulfillment, gladness, satisfaction. It's a message of inner quietude. Contentment allows us to be at peace in our core, no matter what is going on around us, no matter our circumstances. It reminds us that we are whole even when we're feeling fractured. It gives us the inner serenity and fortitude to welcome the messages of all our emotions. Now, we are constantly receiving sensory input, and even though it's tempting to segregate them into physical and emotion, just remember all sensory input of any kind has an emotional component that quickly morphs into a feeling and starts a story. This is how we experience the world around us and our lives. Here's an example, or a few. We touch a hot stove. The physical sensation is heat, but the companion emotional sensation may be shock or even embarrassment. Regardless, the fact that it's hot registers, and within a nanosecond, it becomes a feeling that starts becoming a story about what hot means in this context. Ouch, I won't do that again. Or, ooh, stoves are dangerous. Cooking must be dangerous. I'll never cook again. Or perhaps someone says something to you. It's just a few words, but it sounds mean or derogatory. And within that nanosecond, feelings are hurt, and it starts becoming a story about how callous and disrespectful this person is. Disappointment is an emotion. And we experience that as the feeling that something we had hoped for or expected maybe didn't come to pass. And sometimes disappointment leads to grieving. Anxiety is an emotion. And we experience that as feeling worried that something bad is going to happen. And then we go into overdrive, imagining all the possible bad things. The relationship between emotions and feelings is tight. It can be hard to tell where one stops and the other starts. And you know what? I doubt it matters much other than when we're tracing the physiology like we are now. What does matter is we shoot that whole bundle. We take that whole bundle of feelings and emotions and we shoot them up to our brains to translate in words. Those words become our thoughts. Some of those thoughts become our memories, which is just another name for our conscious stories. Other thoughts, especially the ones from the emotions and feelings we tried to label, push away, suppress, or avoid, those became our subconscious stories. Because we did not let them complete their message delivering system, those became our looping, repetitive, ruminating thoughts and our unhelpful patterns. These became internalized and have acted like inner programming. But notice, our thoughts are not the starting point. If we want to change the way we think, change our thoughts, we have to start at the beginning, our emotions. The emotion, feelings, words, thought, trajectory. A lot happens in that nanosecond. I read Think and Grow Rich, As a Man Thinketh, and all the great books teaching how to change my thoughts and change my life. I diligently observed and monitored my thoughts. I became painfully aware of the repetitive ones, and I got really good at visualization and acting as if replacing my thoughts with better ones. But instead of feeling more whole, I felt sliced in two. The me who intellectually understood what they were saying and followed the directions, and the me who couldn't make it stick, couldn't get those promised results. I felt like a failure, and maybe you've been there too. While it's true that everything gets created twice, first as an idea or thought, and then as a thing that's real based on that idea or thought, that's only half the story. Remember, that thought came from somewhere. So here's another perspective on how our stories get formed. Every story has two parts. Simple fact of what happened. You touched a hot stove. Someone said some words. The two, the meanings we attach to those feelings we have about them, or we tell other people, or other people tell us about what those facts mean. To heal ourselves, to make peace with our past, and begin feeling more in charge of our lives, we need to heal at the root. And that requires feeling through those old pent-up feelings so they can deliver their wisdom and move on. But just like that house that burned, we put it off. Healing seems daunting. We're afraid of dredging everything up that causes pain. We're afraid of what we might find. We don't have any idea how to do it, especially if we tried lots of things that didn't really stick, didn't really work for us. And maybe we're afraid it'll get worse before it gets better. What if there were a fast and effective way to feel through those old feelings that are holding our lives hostage, that didn't require remembering every little thing that had caused those repetitive thoughts and our wounding, but we didn't want to gloss over the very real fact that they had happened and that we had been hurt? Well, there is. That's StoryShift tapping. This is my favorite tool. Tapping is based on the exact same principles as acupuncture. Now, according to Johns Hopkins, acupuncture points are believed to stimulate the central nervous system. And this in turn releases chemicals into the muscles, the spinal cords, and the brain. These biochemical changes stimulate the body's natural healing abilities, and they promote physical and emotional well-being. The Mayo Clinic calls acupuncture a technique for balancing the flow of energy in our body. Well, emotions are energy in motion. In acupuncture, you often feel the sting, a little shock, and then a release. Well, that pretty much describes how I experience tapping. Studies are also indicating that non-invasive forms of stimulation, such as tapping, work just as well as acupuncture. Tapping is similar to acupuncture in that it may feel intense for a minute or two, but the relief and the release are quick, especially when compared to years of other types of therapies. EFT, which is what I first learned, and it's probably the best known form of tapping, has been approved by the Veterans Administration as a healing therapy for PTSD. And many therapists also use various forms of tapping for stress, anxiety, depression, and physical pain. So how does tapping help us emotionally? All right, remember, emotions are energy in motion. And when we stop an emotion in its tracks, we stop the normal and natural cycle. Instead of moving through our bodies as they're designed to, those emotions get trapped where we stop them in our journey through our body, and they start fritzing like a short circuit. And you know what? I was once carrying a heavy emotional load for my family, and my arms ached and burned all the time. Guess where those emotions were stuck? Every single one of us has trapped emotions. It's just part of being alive. Tapping also helps us heal whatever's been handed down from us from past generations. We didn't just inherit things like hair color from our ancestors. We also inherited any of their trauma that's never been healed, because it reflects in what comes down to us and how we're raised or how the family operates. And this can be a lot of stuff, because humans have mostly been taught to avoid, or stuff our emotions. That's why you can watch a movie about war and feel like it's happening to you, even if you've never been to war. You might be sensing your great-great-great-great-granddads never healed war trauma. We can feel just completely swamped by an emotion and not know why, because they can't be figured out intellectually. We can't keep trying to make sense of them. That's futile. The only release comes from finally processing them. Let them deliver their message and they will release us. Tapping is a processing, clearing mechanism. Emotions are energy and it's meant to be in motion, but it's been stopped. We've stopped them. Tapping restarts that motion. It jump starts them. It gets them the feeling moving through and clearing out quickly. So we end up with the wisdom and guidance from the message and then sweet release from the pain. Have you ever taken your jewelry to be cleaned? The jeweler puts it in this little machine and it vibrates and jiggles and the gunk clears out of every little nook and cranny, and then it's clean and sparkly and fresh and renewed. It's not far off from what tapping does. You have emotional gunk hiding deep in your body. We all do. You may not remember what started this feeling, but you know you're still feeling it. And maybe you're pinning it on something more recent, something that's happened now that triggers the same feeling, similar feeling. One big clue that you have trapped feelings that there's something you're talking about or thinking about all the time, repetitively, telling the same story over and over because some part of that story just won't go away. Maybe you had a friend who always had to be right. So you finally broke up with her, but you're still ruminating on the story, telling it whenever you can to whoever will listen, usually claiming that you've overcome it. And yet someone listening to you might think it sounds like you are fighting your own need to be right, your need to be heard, or at least not to be wrong. The need to be right is about fear and safety. Maybe that's what needs healing in you and why what happened with your friend is still bugging you. And talking about it, venting, is not enough. It doesn't get to the underlying cause. That's also why talk therapy can take years to affect change. Now, there's nothing wrong with talk therapy. It's helped me tremendously. There's nothing wrong with any healing modality, something like breathwork, which I love. They each serve a wonderful purpose. The trouble is we often expect them to do something they're not designed to do. It's kind of like using a fork for a spoon's job. Forks and spoons are each perfect for their own jobs. StoryShift tapping addresses the emotional root, the emotions that we have stopped before they could process through. So let me show you what this looks like. All right, we're going to be tapping lightly on our face and upper body, kind of like this. And we'll be speaking those old feelings out loud. We'll go over these again in just a sec. Okay. Tapping's for clearing and healing. And in case you're familiar with EST, we have a couple of differences. We do not use a setup phrase. That's designed to set up a script. Feelings are unscripted. They're messy and can be a little wild. And setting up a script limits the potential scope of the healing. We also don't use a turnaround phrase to end the session. Tapping's like physical exercise, and it'll continue working in you unless you cut it off. And that turnaround phrase, well, it sends a potentially false message that the clearing is complete, whether or not it is. This work. In tapping, we bring the emotion, whatever it is, to the forefront. We say exactly what we're thinking, exactly what we're feeling, especially the things we've been taught we can't or shouldn't say, at least not out loud. We go straight to the feelings and give them a voice. That's all they've ever wanted anyway. And we start with whatever is feeling clenched up at that moment. I'm so angry at you right now. I'm so mad at you at doing for this. And then we let it fly. One feeling leads to the next and the next and the next, and we don't direct, we don't dictate, we don't try to control or corral. Now, we'll be tapping lightly while speaking our feelings out loud, maybe shouting, sometimes crying, literally giving voice to them. Now, the StoryShift tapping points, they are the top of your head, the inside of your eyebrow point, the side of your eye, under your nose, the center of your chin, your collarbone, and under your arm, about where your bra strap is, and then back to the top of your head. Now, these are some of the meridian points used in acupuncture to stimulate the sensory nerves that provide signals to the brain, which processes the information and then causes changes in your body. Now, I personally use 2 fingers. It's fine to use 1 or 3, whatever. You can use the tips or the pads of your fingers. And don't worry about skipping a point when you're going through or lingering on a point. Just keep tapping and speaking till you feel the shift. And it's physical. It's physical, physiological, and psychological. It is free to shout. It is fine to cry. Sometimes the feelings get so big I can't find words, and what comes out of my mouth sounds like primal scream. Ah! Maybe it is. But in general, don't overthink. Don't try to control it. Tune into your body and your feelings and let the process itself lead you through subconsciously and intuitively. Now, tapping is a deep cleaning mechanism. We are not just like wiping off the surface. We're not just slapping pretty words, positive words over deep hurts. We're going deep to the root, and we're going fast. We start right off with what we're really feeling. We go straight to the emotion. We want to say exactly what we're feeling, exactly what is coming up, like this. Feel free to tap and speak along with me, okay? I'm so angry. I am so angry at you. I hate how you have treated me. I don't deserve this. I have never done anything to deserve this. Why are you acting this way? Why are you so mean? You're being ridiculous. You're being unfair. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you acting this way? Ugh, ugh. You're so stupid. You're so mean. You're so inconsiderate. You're just selfish. You only want me for what I can do for you. You only think of yourself. And I am so sick and tired of you only thinking of yourself. What about me? What about my needs? Why does everything always have to be your way? I'm sick of it always having to be your way. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of you. I'm sick of you. I'm sick of you. Not exactly sedate, is it? Not meant to be. Keep going until you feel like you got it all out. Do not worry about whether anything you said is untrue. It's not. This is about your feelings. And at some point, maybe now, maybe sometime in the point, you felt everything, every word you said. Pretend you're lancing a wound and getting all the gunk out. They can go deep, that infection. And remember, we come to tapping because something is bugging us and we don't want that bug to permanently infect us. So say what's bothering you, do not rein it in. It could not come out of your mouth if it were not already inside you somewhere. Get it out. And do not worry at all if you'll attract more of it by speaking it. That's backwards. The more you try to ignore it, the more it's going to try to get your attention. That's what's causing your discomfort and your repetitive thoughts and feelings. If you're feeling or have ever felt trapped inside your own life, this is why. Don't worry whether it's rational. Emotions don't always make sense. And a lot of times they're not even ours. Remember, they're coming from our parents, from how they raised us, from our grandparents and how they raised our parents. They're coming from sources and triggers that we don't even know are inside us. We don't recognize outside us. We may know, for example, that nothing we ever did was good enough for our parents. And we know we're carrying that load, but we don't know why. We don't know why nothing was ever good enough. Well, of course, there's so much more to that story than just that. It's about them, not us, but they're taking it out on us for some reason. Maybe they need for us to do things that they never got to do. Or maybe they're jealous because we're getting to do things they could never do. We don't know. They probably don't know. So instead of trying to figure it all out, our best approach is to focus on healing our feelings. Why wasn't anything ever good enough? Why could I never please you? And go from there. As you practice this self-healing, weird, horrible, strange things may come out of your mouth. You had no idea they were lurking inside, but they were inside, or you couldn't be saying them. Don't get upset or ashamed. That stuff's in each of us because we've been taught to hold it in. Think for just a minute about what all that gunk has been doing inside you. Better out than in. I got so mad at a friend one day, and that good woman was on my last nerve. And I started tapping with, "I'm so mad at you." And I ended up shouting, "I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you." I don't hate her. But I was so angry and I felt so helpless and a little disrespected that even though my logical brain knows she wasn't deliberately being mean or disrespectful, but something in her words or her demeanor was dredging up a deeply buried, unprocessed trigger from a different time in my life. Something I had not processed at that time, and there it was, popping out now. What's happening in our present can trigger long buried and often forgotten hurts. But our triggers can be our friends. They can be pointing us towards a healing opportunity. And this is also a perfect example of why we do our healing in private instead of spewing this all over other people. StoryShift tapping is potent because we deal directly with the underlying emotions. We don't have to remember all the hurtful experiences that led to this. We address the emotion and then we let it go and find its own sources. Tapping kind of acts like a detective in our subconscious. And those sandpaper people, the ones who always rub you the wrong way, they are among your greatest teachers. They're showing you where the emotions you haven't processed have rubbed you raw and will continue rubbing you raw till you give them what they want. And all they want is to be heard and felt so they can complete this job, this mission, and move on. And better yet, clearing this out for you ripples out for your family, your friends, and beyond that into the world. When we heal ourselves, we literally become the change we want to see. We're the pebble in the pond. StoryShift tapping helps you finally move through your emotional backlog far more effectively than just telling yourself to let it go. That sounds good, sure, but it only deals with your conscious thoughts. It never gets to the subconscious root. And even worse, the illusion of eliminating the problem sets you up to feel more frustrated and more like a failure when it crops up again. You don't have to be stuck any longer. You don't have to remain a prisoner of your emotional past. As you begin cleaning, clearing, and healing, your body will begin to feel better. With a regular tapping practice, you'll no longer be rocked by every emotion because you'll know how to work with them. Things that used to bother you won't bother you as much anymore. Life will get easier and more satisfying. And you begin catching yourself when you fall back into old emotional habits and realize you don't have to do that anymore. This is true freedom. It's not dependent on your circumstances, but if you want to change your circumstances, this is where to start. This is the way home to yourself. This is what it means to become found by your original wholeness, acceptance, awareness, and love. And from there, we can do anything. Now, I'm not going to promise you can have everything you think you want, because sometimes we're not yet clear, or it's beyond our control, and sometimes it infringes on the autonomy of another person. Well, all of that's a deeper subject for another day. But with StoryShift, we're going to learn how to allow life to happen around us. You'll no longer feel the need to control everything. Trying to control everything is exhausting and it never works. And when something does get to us, and it will, because we're human and stuff will get on our nerves, we'll recognize it as a healing opportunity. We'll know what to do and we'll have tools to do it. Now be prepared to find all kinds of gunk in there. No one is immune. You might think you've already dealt with everything, done all your work, but this is life. Each new layer, every day-to-day upset is simply an invitation to reconnect even more with our own original wholeness, ourself. And that one shift in perspective will change so many things in your life. Be prepared. Be prepared to find hate and shame, and remember they aren't bad. They're just information. They're just emotions, and we're not going to stuff our emotions anymore or label some of them bad. Be prepared to get frustrated and angry with yourself, maybe with others. Be prepared to realize that there's so much buried in you than you ever realized. And when you feel any of those feelings, tap through them as soon as possible so they don't go creating new emotional baggage. And one day you'll realize you feel lighter. Life feels better. Your quality of life is better. And you'll realize that you've been punishing yourself and everyone around you for a very long time. And you've been keeping your true, tender self hidden in an attempt to protect her. We all do it until we know better. We're not just going to slap a coat of positive thinking or superficial self-love on, like whitewashing over mold. We're going to get rid of the mold first so it can't bleed through again. Our thoughts will become more tranquil. Our self-love will come from rediscovering that we have always been whole. And you're probably going to get frustrated with yourself and feel like some people in your life are not supporting you. Some won't, and that's their choice. You can choose growing and healing and everything that comes with it, or you can choose to stay where you are. It's your choice. Oh, and there will be tears. Tears are nothing to hold back, nothing to be ashamed of. Tears are actually a language of release. And there'll be forgiveness of yourself, of those who have hurt or angered you. And finally, you'll understand that forgiveness is another thing we've been taught backwards. Peace and calm will become your default state of being. It will become familiar. And that's not flatline from avoidance, but rich and full and balanced, because you and your emotions are finally working together as y'all were always meant to. We were always meant to. And you will come to know true connection, true wholeness, true self-love, and your foundation will become rock solid. You'll be able to look back on your life and realize how many extraordinary experiences you've really had. And you'll realize that it's always been less about the destination or perfection and always more about the journey. You'll be able to enjoy the journey and life itself. You'll be able to enjoy each milestone, even as you welcome the next. The StoryShift practices help reprogram your subconscious. You'll realize there's no need to fight or judge your emotions. We're emotional beings. We're designed to experience the full emotional spectrum. And a big part of experiencing them is working with them instead of avoiding them. Remember, emotions are messengers full of wisdom, information, and guidance, and you will finally stop shooting the messenger. And you're going to begin falling in love with your gloriously messy human self. You'll love her when she cries. You'll love her when she screws up. You'll love her when she's mad. You'll love her when she rises into herself. You'll love her when she's happy. You'll love her when she has no clue what's going on. You'll love her every step of the way. and loving her, yourself. That's going to become your normal and natural way to be with yourself. And your new self-talk will become, I love you always, no matter what. This foundation is built on rediscovering love from yourself. It isn't fragile. It isn't depending on others. It don't depend on their acceptance or their approval. They don't have to love us or approve of what we're doing. And when we begin freeing ourselves from that need, we'll realize just how much we've been pretzeling ourselves trying to get something that could never give us the freedom and security we crave. As Najwa Zebian wrote in Welcome Home, when you build your home in other people, you give them the power to make you homeless. Well, it's time to build your home within yourself. Time to come home. Welcome home. The question becomes, why do we keep trying to solve the problems over and over when we can dissolve them at the root? Good question, but how do you do it? Well, today's class was an introduction to what's going on behind the scenes and how to begin working with it. In the beginning, I promised you an invitation and a gift. The invitation is to join the StoryShift program and go much deeper in depth together, answering how we do this and how we apply it and how it becomes our lifestyle. And I've created a StoryShift program just for you based on my own life and my own healing experience. The StoryShift process has helped me stop suffering more than anything else I've ever done. And I've been in a lot of good programs and I've read a lot of books, and they contributed in their own way, but none completely got to the root. The practice is simple, it's repeatable, it's customizable, it's brief. I mean, we're talking 10 minutes a day max. Use it consistently, and it will begin to feel normal and natural to work with your emotions instead of fighting them or feeling rocked by them. The program itself includes a core curriculum plus coaching, supplemental teaching, and all the tools and practices, everyday tools and practices. The curriculum consists of on-demand classes, goodness, with transcripts if you prefer reading. And that goes much deeper into topics we touched on today and shows you how to apply them in your own life. Now, some of my personal favorite lessons are the disappearance of love. If we were born whole and wholly in love with ourselves, where'd that love go? What happened? The wisdom of our emotions. We touched on that today, but digging into sampling of emotions from love to forgiveness to anger to jealousy, and what are they really trying to tell us? The 4 essential questions you must ask yourself if you want to turn your desires into reality. Why your ego doesn't deserve its bad rap. Gaslighting yourself, and oh yes, we all do it. And my absolute favorite, your self-worth is just fine no matter what they say. Once a week, you can join me live for additional teaches, guiding tapping or meditations, Q&A, which is a form of coaching. A recording will always be available, and you can submit questions in advance for the Q&A coaching sessions. So if you attend the weekly calls and practice daily, you're talking an hour a week and 10 minutes a day max to reprogram your subconscious and begin turning your desires into your reality. Another personal favorite of mine is the StoryShift Triggers virtual card deck. It comes with the program. StoryShift itself is a potent daily practice, but what if nothing gets you riled today, or nothing in particular comes to mind when you want to practice tapping? Well, this is where the cards come in. Each card has an open-ended trigger prompt, something like, I feel guilty when, or I'm disappointed when. Whatever comes to mind first, whatever story, let that lead you. because maybe it'll go to something that's deeply buried. There are also printable journal pages to record what comes up with trigger cards or any other story work you do. I like going back and looking at them to see how far I've come, especially on down days. The beauty of StoryShift is that we can heal and reframe our internalized stories without denying them, pretending they didn't happen or didn't hurt. There are 2 payment options that I'll tell you about in just a minute, but let's talk about the bonuses first. The first 5 to pay in full will get a 2-hour one-on-one StoryShift session with me, and we'll work together on one topic of your choosing. Everybody who pays in full will get lifetime access to the curriculum, the private community, the weekly calls, everything, and any and any mini classes that we put in there during whenever. Everyone who joins and pays in full will also receive a physical card deck and a physical journal. I love the virtual cards and the printable pages, but I also love the feel of the physical cards and journal. Everyone who joins, regardless of pay plan, will receive an invitation to the private Facebook group. Imagine a community of self-healing women committed to diffusing their internalized stories, making peace with their past, and turning their true desires into their reality, supporting each other. And then there'll be challenges in many classes throughout the years. Paid in full gets lifetime access. Monthly memberships get access while their membership is active. Now, this is where the marketing gurus say I'm supposed to tell you that all these features add up to some sky high bazillion-dollar price, and oh, you're so lucky to get it bundled for less. And that's true, but I'm just going to tell you straight. The pay in full investment for lifetime access to StoryShift is $697, or you can choose the membership plan for $37 a month. Now, remember, paid in full gets you lifetime access. The membership plan can be canceled at any time and gets you access as long as you remain a member. And now for your gift. It's the Becoming Found StoryShift Quick Start Guide. What it is those 4 essential questions you must ask yourself if you want to turn your desires into your reality. This downloadable PDF tells you what those questions are and how to use them. So why Becoming Found? I might have just thrown that in right here at the last. Well, it's because we're done searching out there for ourselves. We're done with creating our home and other people. We're ready to shift our internalized stories. We're ready to become found again by our own internal inner home, innate, our wholeness, because it's been waiting for us all along. Welcome home. And bye for now. I hope to see you in StoryShift.